Hey, hello, and welcome to the webinar on UASI funding for sustainable EV charging. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our great speakers. Amanda Wood. We've been working with Amanda for quite some time, and some of our customers have had some experiences working with her as well and putting some funding together. She's an expert on federal funding streams. She is very knowledgeable about how to ensure that you get your funding applications in the best light, and you have a chance of getting your funding, the funding opportunities that are due to you. Our CEO, Desmond Wheatley, CEO of Beam, he is a world expert in sustainable EV charging and in fact holds many patents on our products. He's an inventor. He's a spokesperson, a thought leader in the industry, and we're delighted to have both Amanda and Desmond today. And with that, Desmond, I'm going to hand it over to you to get started.
Well, thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction, and thank you to you and Amanda for joining and putting this thing on. And of course, thanks to all of you who are out there listening today, and we're really looking forward to sharing some very useful information with you about this. Look, emergencies and disasters are unfortunate facts of life. I don't know if it's just me, but it seems like we have more and more of them, and they're coming more regularly. None of us can ever guess what's going to come in the future, but fortunately we can be, at least to some extent, prepared for things that come down the line. And that's really what the purpose of this webinar is to give you some tools that you can use to be prepared for the sort of future disasters that might come down the road. We at Beam are very proud of the products that we make, which will keep vital vehicles running during grid failures and other emergencies, and also provide a source of power for first responders and others as they try to keep us all safe and alive even during the same types of disasters. That's what our products have been doing for many years and have been notably seen even in the media recently for doing that during this dreadful COVID pandemic that we're all going through. The products are, of course, only half of the story. The other half of the story is paying for them, and that's the great expertise that Amanda and the team at Becker bring here. She's been really successful and helped several of our customers in their efforts to identify the funds that they require and indeed are entitled to prepare themselves for these sorts of eventualities. She's going to be talking today about the UASI, or the Urban Area Security Initiative, which covers 36 regions across the United States. I think there's it's around $600 million available for these items, as you can see on here: prevention, protection, response, and recovery. And luckily for us, or not luckily, but there's no accident here, our products provide for those four eventualities. So if you just pop the next slide, please, Sandra. We'll spend a couple of minutes just talking to you about the products and why we do what we do. As you can see here, obviously we live in an electrified world. That's fantastic. Electricity has dramatically changed all of our lives for the better, and we're very, very reliant on it. And yet, while we become more and more reliant on it, we're seeing more interruptions with the overtaxed grid. The US grid is a magnificent machine. It's in many ways the largest machine that mankind has ever built. It's been serving us for over 100 years actually, but it is prone to centralized failure. And as we've seen in California with the heat waves and the fires, blackouts and brownouts, and on the East Coast, of course, with hurricanes and other weather events, same thing. But I'm also worried about nefarious nation state actors. We know the Russians have been in the grid. We know the Iranians have been in the grid. Terrorists can knock out portions of it, or even large sections of it, or the whole thing, frankly. So it's a prospect that we need to be aware of and we need to be prepared for, and that's what we're offering you here today. A couple $100 billion lost each year in US businesses from production losses as a result of energy interruption or electricity interruption. That's money, but of course there are also lives lost, and if there's a major outage, particularly when we have an electrified transportation sector, that's going to become a major issue. In fact, I just wrote and published a piece called The Grid Pandemic, and you'll see the subtitle there says it's going to make COVID-19 look like a sideshow. Indeed it will. If you feel like reading that, you can find that on our website, and I think it's on my LinkedIn page and various other places. Or just get in touch with us and we'll figure out how to get you. It's not full of my opinions, you'll be happy to hear. I've just saved you the difficulty of looking up all the facts, and this is just a regurgitation of facts from most of our federal agencies talking about how this is all going to happen. So we want to be prepared for it, and again, that's what this webinar is about today. Show you products that will do that and how to pay for them. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, what we do, we make products which are completely off-grid for electric vehicle charging primarily. That's our purpose. So we have the fastest deployed, most reliable and scalable EV charging infrastructure solution out there. You get the EV charger of your choice, by the way. We don't tell you which charger to choose. We'll make any of the quality brands work here. And the key thing here is that we're faster deployed, less disruptively deployed, at lower total cost of ownership. But for the purposes of this webinar, what we're really talking about here is the fact that we'll keep your vehicles moving when the grid goes down. And if you're running a fleet, or even just if you own an electric vehicle, of course, you can't afford to have the thing not operating while you're waiting for the utility grid to come back up. So that's a huge piece. But beyond that, all of our units can be equipped with an emergency power panel. And we've already seen tremendous uses of that powering COVID emergency centers and other first responder type requirements here. Again, because we're not on the grid, when the grid goes down, people can plug into our emergency power panels and get life-saving electricity from those units. There's really no more reliable source of electricity than solar. We know where the sun's going to be every morning for about the next 5 billion years, and if that's not energy security, I don't know what is. Next slide, please. Just a quick rundown of the of our top product here, which is the EV Arc electric vehicle autonomous renewable charger. Underline the word autonomous. We've got a solar array which is tracking the sun using our patented tracking solution. That gives us about 25% more electricity than a fixed array. Not theoretical, by the way, tested. Below that, we've got an enclosure where we're storing that energy. We've got a bunch of computers and other electronics which are conditioning the electricity to make it usable either by the EV charger of your choice or, as I said, through that emergency power panel. And then that's all supported on a column which is attached to what is at once the dumbest and smartest part of our invention, which is the ballast and traction pad. It's because of that ballast and traction pad that we can deploy these things in minutes, not months, with no construction, no permitting, no disruption to your site at all, no trenching, none of the other things that you might normally be used to going through. And by the way, although the product is rated for 120-mile-per-hour winds, which gets it at 95% of the United States, we know that it survived Category 5, 185-mile-an-hour winds in the Caribbean, where our customer, the government down there, sent us a letter saying that our product was in fact the only thing that survived Hurricanes Irma and Maria. So we're rating it, we're stamping it for 120-mile-an-hour winds, but as I say, it's very, very robust, very well engineered and heavily built, and has in fact really in the real world survived Category 5, 185-mile-an-hour winds. It's flood proof to 9.5 feet. Think of it, I don't know if there's another piece of electrical equipment out there that can claim that. We're flood proof to 9.5 feet. So if you have an inundation, as long as it's under 9.5 feet, this product's going to continue to operate. Perhaps you're not using it in 9.5 feet of water, but certainly when the waters recede, it's there for you. You've got the EV charging, you've got the emergency power as you try to rebuild after that type of disaster. And then incredibly stable snow loads, seismic, whatever else. Really, wind is always the governing thing for us. So if we can withstand those types of winds, we can withstand just about anything else that's thrown at it. So it's a very robust, very reliable piece of equipment. And of course, it's transportable. You can move it to other locations if you need to. And this is how we move the thing around. Actually, several choices. My favorite, of course, is the sort of orange thing that you see there in the picture. That's the Arc Mobility Trailer. This is a highly specialized hydraulic transportation system. Some of you could refer to it as a trailer, but it is a specialized trailer which is designed to pick up and move these things around with a single operator. So you've got this tremendous flexibility, either to get out of the way of incidences that are coming. If you needed to, for example, if you knew that the flooding was going to be more than 9.5 feet, you could move it to higher ground. But mostly this is about being able to move it to areas and regions where you have problems. This is a regional asset. Think of it that way. In California right now, terrible fires happen to be in Fresno County today. A lot of fire trucks and smoke and everything else. It would be possible to fleet large numbers of these units in and provide us a very clean, very reliable source of electricity. And of course, there are no liquid fuels. So you don't have further fire risks. you don't have the risk of the units not starting, and you don't have the emissions and other things that go along with that, either noise or sound emissions. It's permanent, but it is transportable, as I said. You can move it around with the ARC Mobility trailer, and in fact, our biggest customers like New York City and City of Long Beach and Google and others own the trailers as well. We sell the trailers and we train them in their use, which is really easy. So you could do that. You could own some of these units and have one of these trailers, move them around to any location where there's a requirement within your region. But you can also pick them up and move them around with a 15,000-pound forklift. So no one's going to steal this thing, but if you have the right equipment, you can move it around. You can put it on a flatbed. And in fact, they fold down just like a satellite and fit inside a 20-foot shipping container as well. So you've got lots and lots of options in terms of moving it around. And then this final bullet point, because you can move it, you own it. It's a piece of equipment. It's not a tenant improvement. So if you're on a leased property or you think you might move facilities or something like that, take this thing with you. Don't leave it as a sunk asset like a grid tie charger. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I hope we're going to show you a little video right now, and this will tell you what we did with some news coverage we got for this dreadful COVID business, but we were happy to help with it.
Happening today on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, the city of Oakland has moved one of its electric vehicle charging stations to provide EV charging and emergency power to a coronavirus testing facility. The chargers, made by Envision Solar, will provide power to the site without having to use a generator. Oakland usually has the units in locations where they could provide emergency power in case of grid failures. This is the first time that the EV chargers are being used to support COVID-19 related medical needs.
COVID is a respiratory problem, so having generator fumes and that sort of stuff in a test centre is hardly ideal. This is a great way for Oakland to have a clean and renewable source of electricity, which is silent and emissions free.
Envision Solar says it is working with other cities and corporate partners to do the same thing across the world, in fact.
New this morning, observing Earth Day, which is today as the country battles the coronavirus pandemic. A short time ago here, the city of Oakland relocated a solar-powered electric vehicle and disaster energy charging system. It was moved to a COVID-19 test site to energize electric cars and provide backup power for the facility. Oakland leaders say it's an example of the city's commitment to sustainability by using equipment for a number of purposes.
This is a self-contained electric vehicle charging station totally powered by solar. So it's green, sustainable, but most importantly, it's portable. And that's why we have it here at the test station today.
These portable units fit inside a single parking spot. The technology allows the guidance system to follow the sun throughout the day, and the energy is stored in onboard batteries and then can be used at any time.
So what a fantastic use of budget dollars. Here's the city of Oakland, who had deployed these things to charge their electric vehicles. Of course, during COVID, there were less people going to the office locations where they had those EV chargers. They were able to redeploy them and power their COVID emergency centers, replacing the diesel generators that they've been using. Now, of course, any of you that have worked with generators know that they're prone to failures. You have to fuel them. You have to transport the fuels to the sites where they're being used. They require maintenance and storage and all sorts of other things. And then they emit noise and fumes and everything else, hardly ideal, as I said in the piece, for a respiratory problem. But in any event, and liquid fuels are not really the best thing to be transporting into a fire zone, for example, as we're so acutely aware here in California. So this is just a great way to leverage budget dollars to get a whole lot more value, certainly when you compare that to a grid tie charger, which would be useless during those times of events. It's something that's going to charge and give you power whenever you need it, regardless of what the conditions are, frankly. Remember, this is a product that our biggest customer is New York City. It's operating during the winters in New York. So don't be worried about wherever you are in the country. We've engineered this thing to work well, even in inclement conditions, and with a great deal of robustness. So if you think about what we're doing here, we're replacing the diesel generator or the other types of generators. I've already mentioned no fuels, nice, clean and silent power, and most of all, safe. Very, very safe to use and very easy to use. You don't need to start it. I can tell you in that COVID test center, the medical people there were really very happy that they were no longer responsible for starting and stopping generators, which is something that frankly they're not trained for. In this instance, the power was always there for them, ready day or night. All they had to do was plug into it. And of course, we're monitoring these units 24/7 from our network operations center. We get all the data off them, and we share all of that data with you as well. So you can see the production, the storage, and the units operating across a wireless connection. Lots of different uses for the power. I don't need to tell you that. You're the experts. You have probably better idea than I do. But I can certainly tell you that in the real world uses of these things, we've seen first responders and others using them for actually quite often a lot more than we originally anticipated. In the photograph that you can see there in the background, they couldn't get the generator that was supposed to be running this place running, and on the first night, and then about a week later, the thing failed again, and so they ran the entire facility from our products. Just a great use. Next slide, please. So yeah, secure energy, wind rate, I think we've already covered this. Very robust product. It will survive just about any conditions that you can throw at it. I think we've covered this one as well. Again, no construction. That's a really big thing to remember. No construction, no electrical work means you generally don't. We've never had to get permits. We're in over 100 municipalities across the United States in every conceivable condition, from the hottest deserts in Nevada up to the snowiest conditions in Buffalo, New York. Never had to get a permit. Never had a failure. And so just a really good solution. Right. Well, with that, now you know how it works and what you can have. Amanda's going to tell you how you can pay for it, which is, of course, better than half of the equation here. So I'm going to hand over to the very capable Amanda Wood. Thank you.
Thank you, Desmond. It's good to speak with you all today. I think I've spoken with some of you over the past few months as we've talked about creative ways to fund, EV ARC purchases in your community. And today we want to really focus in on this preparedness use case. And the reason why we're focusing in on it today is because it's very timely, and it really reflects sort of the mindset of the federal government these days. EV charging is such an important asset to have in your community, particularly off-grid. The great thing about this is that, unlike a lot of emergency preparedness tools, it doesn't sit on a shelf. We have this nice dual use case, and because of that, we're on FEMA's authorized equipment list. So I'm going to talk a little bit about UASI today, because I think it's really the time of the year to be talking about this. But rest assured that beyond this, there are other funding options that come from other funding streams, like other programs within the Department of Homeland Security, USDOT, Department of Energy. But for now, let's talk a little bit about UASI. UASI stands for Urban Area Security Initiative. This is a program that is now in almost its 20th year. It was developed by Congress following 9/11 with a recognition that local governments, and some more so than others, have really specific needs in terms of preparedness and response assets and training. And so since that time, FEMA has designated every year roughly 36 over the past few years. We've sort of gone up and down over the years, but pretty consistently about 36 communities every year that whose regions qualify for a direct allocation of funding to be used for items on FEMA's authorized equipment list. They make these designations based on population and threat analysis, and these are folks who have really acute preparedness and response needs. So I'll go over the timeline in just a moment, but essentially, if you are in a UASI community, you receive a direct allocation. You then submit a spending plan to FEMA, and EV ARCs are certainly something you could include in that spending plan that you submit. Next slide, please. So this is a list of last year's, well, I guess this year we have about a week left in this fiscal year. We're almost at the very tail end of it. This is the fiscal year 20 list of UASI communities. Now, when you see these cities, keep in mind that a UASI area often extends beyond the city proper. So some of these UASIs contain up to like 6 or 7 counties that surround it. If you have questions about eligibility and whether or not you're in a UASI area, just reach out to me. Happy to help you through that. If you are in a UASI area, we can together work to pursue this funding. And if you're not, we can certainly look at other options as well. But typically, in a UASI of 3 or 4 counties, there'll be a UASI governing body that will include folks from the other counties, from the cities within the counties. So any public agency within these UASI areas is eligible to pursue this funding. Next slide, please. So I hesitate always a little bit to give a timeline because so much of this depends on Congress getting their act together and passing their appropriations bills. But when Congress created this program nearly 20 years ago, they were a little more prescriptive than a lot of other federal programs. So we do have some real time markers that come with the UASI program. And because they're rapid in an effort to get this money out the door as quickly as possible, that process starts really early, even before the beginning of the new fiscal year sometimes. So now, some UASIs have started in the past month, some are starting now. UASI regions are collecting local priorities from regional, city, and county partners. So DHS does not tell your local UASI how they have to do this process. So it's a little different on a region by region basis. Don't let that scare you off. We can help you navigate that process. That's what I'm here for. So right now, UASIs are starting to sort of get their ducks in a row and figure out, what they want to include in their spending plans. At some point later this fall or winter, Congress will pass the Department of Homeland Security funding bill. It's actually passed the House side already. We're waiting for Senate action, and then it's going to need to get signed by the president. But as soon as all that happens, things start moving quickly. So within 60 days, DHS has to announce those UASI regional allocations. In a typical year, we might have one added, we might have one drop off, but generally speaking, that list I showed you will reflect the regions that are likely to be funded in fiscal year 21. So 60 days after that bill passes and is signed into law, DHS announces the UASI regional allocations. And then 60 days after that, UASI regions have to turn in their spending plans. That is a super quick timeline for any of you who work in state and local government to be able to do it that quickly. And for that reason, UASIs do start this process in the summer and fall without knowing their exact allocations. And allocations can run anywhere from $1 million to over $50 million, depending on the region and the threat analysis. So there's a lot of work that goes into this locally, and I don't want to see anyone miss out on it because they're not getting started now. So we can help you get started now. And then again, because there is a vested interest in getting these assets out quickly to the folks who need it most, just 60 days later, funds are approved and they can be drawn down. So this is a quick process once it starts going, and that's why people get started right now working on it. Next slide, please. So sort of the essential qualifier for using UASI funds or any of the other DHS preparedness grants is that you are on FEMA's authorized equipment list. And we are. There's our AEL designation right there. And we are on that list because there's been a recognition on the part of the federal government that this is the sort of asset that could be really important in these high threat urban areas. And then again, what I said about that dual use case, I mean, if you look down that authorized equipment list, there are a lot of items on that hopefully will never get used, will never be needed in your community. The nice thing about EV ARCs is that you can use it every single day for solar charging, but then it is this great regional, transportable, off-grid asset in the event that you all need it. Next slide, please. So when I work with communities that have made the decision to pursue using UASI or other DHS preparedness funds for EV ARCs, we help with language that'll ensure that your use case is really well aligned for what FEMA is looking for in the spending justification. So, for a UASI program, we need to show a clear nexus to terror threats, preparedness, and response. And sadly, it's easy to demonstrate the fragility of our grid and its vulnerabilities. So that's pretty easy. Demonstrate regional benefit. Again, the fact that this is transportable and a regional asset means that that's, again, something really easy to demonstrate. Supporting your regional preparedness goals. So every UASI region, every state, most communities in the United States have preparedness documents. You're required to have one if you're a UASI. They get updated sometimes annually, sometimes a bit less often. But I've never seen a preparedness document that doesn't address the need already for grid fragility, for resiliency, for making sure that there is a power backup in the event of some sort of terror threat or disaster. And then we check the fourth box too, because we are on FEMA's authorized equipment list. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk and determine if you are in a UASI community. That's pretty easy to figure out. And then we can walk down that path. If we determine that you're not in a UASI community, that doesn't mean there isn't federal funding for what you're trying to do. So every year, the federal government sends about $1.1 billion to state and local governments for these preparedness grants. There's some specialty grants too. But so roughly 600 million of that is to UASI, and then another almost $500,000 goes through the state Homeland Security Grant Program. Similar requirements, the same authorized equipment list, except we're then working through your state to access these funds. There's another extra little layer, but we can help you navigate that. That's totally doable. We have a brand new grant that just came out this summer, and we're working fast and furious with a lot of communities that are trying to respond to this, this great new opportunity. It's the FEMA grant, FEMA BRIC grant. It's a hazard mitigation grant. States are the applicants, cities and counties are the sub-applicants. And so we're helping a lot of cities and counties right now submit sub-applications to pursue this funding for EV ARCs. About 2,000 communities in the US receive community development block grant funds. You may not have realized that EV ARCs are really well aligned with that program as well. And then of course, the US DOT CMAQ program, which if you work in sustainability, you're certainly, in air quality, you're certainly familiar with. We are definitely an allowable use of that as well. So this list is not comprehensive, but it just gives you, you know, some assurances that if you are eager to do this and you just don't have the local funding to be able to do it to the scale that you want to, the federal government is making investments in this area, and we should work together to try to help get you some of that funding. Next slide, please. The next slide, there we go, talks to you getting your fair share. So as I said, there are a lot of ways to fund this using federal funding. You all deserve to have a federal partnership. The federal government has a vested interest in sort of all the highlights of what an EV ARC can do for your community. So whether it is, you know, resiliency, whether it is air quality, you know, there are multiple federal programs. If you're not getting a lot of federal funding, it's very possible your neighbors are. You guys are sending money to DC. Let's make sure you get your fair share back. So I'm not going to say that all $400 billion in federal funding can be used for EV ARCs. That would be silly. But just know that there are 26 federal agencies. Many of those agencies fund things like this. We try to work with you to get really creative and make sure that whatever your use case is, that we match it up with a federal opportunity. Next slide, please. So this is, we've thrown some information at you. Don't be overwhelmed because I am here to help you through the process. So we can set up a time to talk. I will work to identify high viability grant opportunities for you, put you in touch with the right people at the right time. We'll see if there are unexpended prior year funds we can reprogram, help you with language for your applications or your sub-applications or pre-applications or spending plans. If it makes sense, we'll get your members of Congress and senators engaged. They want to be helpful. They want to make sure as many resources as possible are coming back to their constituents. And then once you get the good news from the federal agency, we can help expedite drawdown of funds. So I don't want you to be intimidated by the federal funding process. There is a great deal of funding there, and we want to make sure you're getting your fair share. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Sandra.
Thank you, Amanda. I always enjoy hearing what's coming down the pipeline. Some of you I see were on our last webinar we did back in June, and some of you have had a session with Amanda and your BEAM contact. Those were very general. What we did is we put together a customized funding profile, and this time we're looking at doing that very specific to the UASI program, but there are some of you that may want other funding opportunities to explore outside of that. So that's certainly something that we can cover. So what we're doing is a customized report based on your needs, your area. We are focusing initially on UASI. Folks who were in the June webinar, we've already got those applications started and underway, but it's not too late. So make sure that when you do have your session, that you, if you are open to it, or if you haven't already pursued other funding, that could certainly be on the table as well. So we'll be reaching out, and I think many of you, I see names I recognize are already connected with our team. So we'll be reaching out, making sure you get on the calendar so we can create your customized funding profile. And with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. I've got a couple of questions teed up here that people have put in. If anybody has any more questions, feel free while we're addressing these to add to it. You can move your cursor on the screen and you'll see a little Q&A button pop up, and feel free to enter questions. So let's see, the first question here, is it a bad idea to apply for more than one grant?
I'm
Amanda.
happy to answer. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. No, it is not a bad idea. Often we can use the same language for a couple different grants, which is nice and efficient. But beyond that, my experience and my background is Capitol Hill, where I worked with communities to get federal funding. And for the past 15 years, I've been doing that same work. My experience is that federal funding begets federal funding. So if you've been successful with one grant or pursuing one grant, and you become a known quantity with these federal agencies, and they feel comfortable that you're expending these funds wisely, you know, that additional funding will follow. So there's no reason why you cannot apply for multiple grants within one federal agency. At the same time, there's no reason why you cannot apply for grants across different federal agencies. There's absolutely no penalty. I think that that you know, the quality of submissions varies drastically when these federal program managers review grants, and so they're always pleased to get a really high quality, well thought out application, and certainly would not shame you at all for submitting multiple.
Great, thank you. Desmond, this is a question for you. If we don't have the trailer, can you move the unit?
Yes, we can, and we do often for our customers. So there's as I mentioned earlier, there's a variety of different ways of moving these around, but certainly one of them is if you need us to, we will come and move them around, and it's a very painless process because obviously there's no site preparation required. What we need you to do is have the parking space in which the unit fits open. I should have been clear on this. These units fit inside a standard legal size parking space, but they do not reduce parking in any way at all because the vehicles park on them. So you won't lose a space. That's another unique feature of our patented product. Just leave a space open for us and we'll come and move it for you.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, another question. We've never applied for a grant before. Can anyone do this?
Yes, anyone can do it. I think it is intimidating. And that's why I'm really pleased that the folks at Beam want to have a resource for you all to make it a little less intimidating and a little easier. Clearly people apply for federal grants all the time without assistance, but you don't need to. I'm here to help you navigate the process. So just know that I'm here to serve as a resource for you. I'll make the process as easy as possible on you and as successful as possible, and help you get the resources you need to bring this asset to your community.
Okay, great. How do we figure out who to contact in our community for Homeland Security funding?
So I have access to lists from FEMA of the leadership in all of the UASI areas. Every UASI, as I said, does it a little bit differently. If you are located within a UASI region and are therefore eligible for UASI funding, we will do some research. Sometimes it will go through your county and then to the larger UASI body. If you're in a county, you may have somebody sitting on the UASI board. So we're happy to help you navigate that. And if there's any question about your eligibility as a UASI community, if you're not located within one of those 36 regions, within a county that is included in that UASI, we can assist you in pursuing other DHS funding, sort of that parallel state Homeland Security grant program funding.
Okay, great, thank you. Desmond, this one's for you. Once EV ARC chargers are purchased, if they're needed for generator or communications support, who makes the connections from the chargers to the electricity distribution system?
The great thing is you don't have to worry about that. The units come equipped with the chargers for your electric vehicles, and also a separate emergency power panel. Now, this emergency power panel looks exactly like the emergency power panel or the power panel that you would see on any generator set. It's deliberately made to look like that, so whoever uses it doesn't have to try and figure it out or understand how it works. It's exactly like you would normally see. And what you're going to do, find there is a range of 120 volt and 240 volt outlets, again, just like a typical generator power panel. And whatever your requirements are, you're going to plug into that. In certain special use cases where there's a requirement for greater power, 3-phase or something else like that, we can make specialized adapters for that. That would be something that we would deploy from the factory, so you would receive the unit like that. But in most instances, just plugging into that emergency power panel provides everything that our customers require.
Okay, great. Let's see, next question. What is the overall capacity and recovery rate from this unit? For example, can it charge cars continuously?
Well, that's a great question. So let me put this in the best metric of all where EV charging is concerned: miles. At the end of the day, miles driven are what we're supplying to our customers, and then of course power from the emergency power panel in the event that that's what they choose to use. An EV ARC will generate and store enough electricity to provide for up to 245 driving miles every day. That's really useful to know that the average US sedan, according to the Department of Transportation, drives about 30.4 miles per day. So clearly we can charge an awful lot of average miles driven every day. And then most of the fleet vehicles that we're dealing with, and of course there are variations across this, but most of our fleet customers, and again, we're in over 100 municipalities across the country charging fleet vehicles, we're seeing more like 20 or 25 miles a day driven with fleet vehicles. So obviously, 200 miles a day, we can charge an awful lot of them. And then a final statistic for you: 8 out of 10 commuters require 24 miles or less for their round trip commute. So again, we can charge an awful lot of them. These are Department of Transportation numbers, by the way. You can plug as many as 6 vehicles at a time into an EV ARC, and it will reach as many as 12 parking spaces. You don't need to be on the EV ARC to use it. As long as you're within a sort of 12 parking space reach, and you can plug as many as 6 in as a day, as I say, at a time. So what we're really encouraging here is what we refer to as DRR, or daily range replenishment. We're not talking about emptying cars and then filling them back up. That's the old gas station model. This should be used more like the way you charge your cell phone. Plug it in every time you see the wire. So plug these things in at the end of every shift, whether that's daytime or nighttime, doesn't matter, because of course the product works day and night. And sometimes even PRR. We have customers actually, it's periodic range replenishment. So they'll go out, they'll drive their fleet vehicles for a couple of hours, bring them back, plug them in for an hour or two, take them out again, drive them for a couple more hours. The key thing is just to keep plugging them in and topping them off, and that way the units will keep up with you.
All right, thank you, Desmond. Is your assistance a fee for service, or is the assistance you provide free for applicants you assist?
It is at no cost to you. So the good folks at Beam have been kind enough to engage me to assist you. So there's no cost at all to you.
Yeah, and just to thank you, Amanda. I think we've held, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these meetings in the last couple months since our other webinar. So please take advantage of this. We want to help you. We want to engage. And yes, we work with Amanda. She's fantastic. Those of you on the call, some of you have had sessions with her before. I really encourage everyone to take advantage of this. Another question: does the installation require any surface preparation, Desmond?
The EV ARC is designed to be deployed on pretty much any flat surface. We're in parking lots and on street and all sorts of weird locations, right all the way across the United States, in the Caribbean, in South America, and even in a small way in Europe. And I can tell you that we've deployed on concrete, blacktop, gravel, even grass. So as long as you've got a relatively flat surface, it's not clearly designed to be deployed on tops of rough boulders or anything else like that. And the other thing to be thinking about is if the parking space that you're going into is severely off grade, so not relatively flat. I would, if it's on a severe slope or something like that, it's probably not the best environment for it. But if you've got a relatively flat parking space, the surface and not quicksand or something like that, then it's going to be fine. The units weigh about 10,000 pounds, but because the weight is dispersed over that very large ballast and traction pad, oddly enough, they actually produce less pounds per square inch than I do standing in a pair of shoes in a parking lot. It's all about the way the weight's dispersed across that base pad. So even top decks of parking structures, they can be deployed in that way because there's certainly a lot less point loading than a vehicle would be. But I think you can be confident that if you have a relatively flat environment, regardless of what the surface is, as long as it's obviously within reason, if you could park a vehicle on it, you can put an EV ARC on it. Let me put it like that.
Great. We have one more question, so if anybody has any more, go ahead and while this one's being answered, enter it. Otherwise, this will be our last question. Is reporting on these grants time-consuming and difficult?
I think people have that impression. I think I can make you feel better about this. No, it's actually not. When you hear about these complicated federal grants with all these requirements, those are grants for projects that require permitting. Sort of the beauty of this is that we don't have any federal or local permitting requirements. We don't have to worry about historic preservation. Oh my goodness, there are some onerous federal grants, but the nice thing about this and what we're doing is that it's pretty straightforward. Federal government just wants to get this money out the door so that you all can, protect your communities, ensure you have a resilient community, an environmentally responsible community, and that you have an asset you can use really on a day-to-day basis and in the event of an emergency.
Just follow up on that comment. Thank you for that, Amanda. But just the key thing that I want you to remember from this, aside from all the other good information that Amanda's given you, is that there is no construction here. And that means no site disruption. There's no digging, no trenching, no spoils removal. None of the things that normally require a lot of attention and permitting, CEQA and NEPA and all the other things that you might have to go through. These are not instances that we have to be concerned with, because although this is a 20-year product and gives you a permanent solution, essentially a permanent solution, it's portable, transportable, and therefore doesn't cause any site disruption at all. And that really helps us. And as you know, when grant and stimulus dollars and everything else are concerned, they're always looking for shovel-ready projects. We're the ultimate in shovel-ready because there is no shovel. You don't have to do any work at all. Just as I say, leave that parking space clear and we'll drop the unit off in it.
Great. Well, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Desmond. And thank you all for attending today. And we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Be in touch.
Thank you.